What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more.
I had an abortion last year. It was an incredibly positive experience for me because I didn't want to become a mother.
I went to the doctor and she told me I was pregnant, and I said, cool, give me the stuff.
Tim Pool has a debate about abortion on his podcast, and once again, we see how easy it is for the facts of life to destroy the pro-murder lobby, but there's a surprise in this episode, and it's that you'll hear today from a supposed Christian pastor who is somehow pro-abortion. Is this yet another indication of the dangers of secularism? And when does a baby actually become a person? We'll answer that and more today on Indie Thinker. Welcome to the show. My name is Reed Huberman. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Did you know here at Indie Thinker, we're going far beyond the podcasting world and entering into groundbreaking documentaries and original films. In fact, right now we're in the process of producing a documentary on fatherlessness and the breakdown of the nuclear family. Here's a word from our friend Victor Marks talking about the film.
Hey everybody, Victor Marks here. I just want to tell you there's a great opportunity for you to join us in producing a film called Fatherless. They're intentional forces which we know are demonically inspired that are destroying the nuclear family. Listen, I've been helping kids for 20 years and seen them locked up as young as 8 years old, and we've rescued kids out of the most horrific situations of trafficking. And it all boils down to this, in my opinion. It's a lack of fathers in our homes. It's worse than everybody can imagine, but this film is going to expose how intentional, again, I believe demonic forces are at destroying the nuclear family. This film being made by my friend Reed, it's going to make a difference. Go to the link on the screen and join us in this project. Thank you, and God bless you.
If you want to see the full trailer to Fatherless, or if you want to help us support this channel or the film, you need to subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that by going to the link on the screen right now, where you can find not only Indie Thinker exclusives, but ways to do all of the things I just mentioned. If the show has been a benefit to you in the past, I highly encourage you to take a moment to look at what we have available to you, but also to think about how you can help benefit the mission and the vision of Indie Thinker. If there is a single argument that the right has the ability to win, perhaps more so than anything else, but has failed at even attempting to fight, it is the pro-life argument. I mean, just think of it. We've progressed so far as a society, yet here we are in the 21st century, still killing babies and justifying that with arguments like a baby in the womb is nothing more than a clump of cells, which, by the way, we all are. And things like keep your bands off my body, and a man should never tell a woman what to do. That is, of course, unless he is pro-murder. Oh, so you get to kill whatever you want as long as you're a woman? Feminism, folks, has reached its apotheosis. By the way, the stupidest of all these arguments is the government shouldn't tell you what to do with your body. Yes, it should. It tells parents not to abuse their children, and it tells other people not to go around murdering people or plowing through people with your car. So yes, the bodily autonomy argument is stupid, and yes, the government should tell you what to do with your body to a degree. And when it involves murder, they definitely should be telling you. Imagine punching someone in the face, by the way, and telling the cops when they arrive at the scene, you can't tell me what to do with my fists, I have bodily autonomy. But this kind of idiotic argument has dominated America and costs millions of lives each year. Few organizations have the temerity to oppose and to expose the foolishness that we see in organizations like Planned Parenthood, I guess out of fear. But pro-life organizations like Choice for Two have been fighting back and actually pushing against the madness. And it's time we started watching, so check it out.
Human rights. You may think you've always had yours, but you would be wrong. So how did you get your human rights? From the magical birth canal, of course. Disclaimer, birth canal is not the size of an actual birth canal. Just saying. Before the baby or fetus is born, it is not a human being. Clearly. But as it passes through the birth canal, something amazing happens that transforms it into a person with human rights. Observe. Not a person, not a person, not a person. Coming out the other end, a person! Human rights! Congratulations, you now have value. Can't say the same for this one. No human rights? Human rights. No human rights? Human rights. Makes sense. Thanks, Magical Birth Canal. Science.
What Choice for Two and every pro-life organization must do is to show the world how incredibly foolish and wrong the abortion argument is by exposing a simple fact. If that baby in your body is not a choice but a human being, then the debate's over. This is how we win every one of the arguments from the left and from progressives when we establish the fact that a baby in your body is a baby. Ends all of the arguments. So let's drop the euphemistic language and start calling an abortion a murder and a fetus a baby. Once we do that, the choice is clear. You don't get to kill a baby because you were raped. You don't get to kill a baby because you're a single mom, and you don't get to kill your baby, well, for any reason. I don't know why I must tell the podcast world the perfectly obvious today, but here we are. If we're going to stop the big pharma death machine from raking in cash and donating millions of dollars to Democrat candidates, odd, right? So that they can continue to run their babies through death mills, we're going to have to get really honest and, unfortunately, wake the church up on this issue. We're going to have conversations like the one we saw on Tim Pool's podcast just recently. Check it out.
The fundamental question here is, what is abortion and what does it do, and the harms? Because absolutely, I think that
you're talking about life begins at conception then. Right?
Well, yes, we all know life begins at conception. Biologists confirm that life begins at conception.
Would you disagree?
I would. Yeah.
Well,
when do you think you became you?
When did I become me?
Yeah. When did you come into existence as Ryan?
On September 9th of 1976, when my body left my mother's body and was detached, and I began to breathe and live on my own.
You weren't living before you were evacuated out of the womb?
I had to be connected to my mother's body in order to be alive.
But you were alive because things were happening, right? Because you didn't magically, your mother's vaginal canal is not magical. It doesn't turn a non-living entity into a living entity. You were alive, you were born, and you changed locations. Now your degree of dependency changed, but you were still alive. There were, right, cellular reproduction was happening, you were growing, you were metabolizing food into energy. So if you look at the biological markers for what is alive and what is life, you were alive.
So let me just take a moment to note the fact that you're hearing from a supposed pastor here with scare quotes around it, to be sure. Last I checked, the Bible kind of doesn't like that murder thing, and it doesn't resort to erroneous pseudo-intellectual arguments about what constitutes life in order to tiptoe around this issue. So when this pastor is given the opportunity by Kristan, who is a great pro-life speaker and one of the leaders at Students for Life, when he's asked to give kind of the definition of what constitutes a life, he gives his birth date. I mean, this is totally arbitrary for in the first place. Your birth date is when you became a person. Why? Why? I mean, we already saw the magical birth canal thing, and you heard Kristan make mention of it. Your mother's birth canal didn't confer upon you personhood, and the inability to breathe outside of the womb does not cancel your personhood. I'm sorry. The fact that 3 seconds before that baby popped out, you could have murdered it, according to this pastor, is totally irrational. And I think he knows it. That's why he has to come up with the absolutely absurd. And that's what often happens here. And let's just be really, really clear. It's not just absurd, it is incredibly unscientific. This is why whenever a Christian like myself comes along and gives a pro-life argument, we need to be really clear on this subject so that we can make sure that people understand. I'm not just purely giving you a religious argument, but I'm perfectly happy to do so. I'm giving you a religious argument and a scientific argument. We'll get to the religious part of this in just a moment. But the scientific argument is clear. From the NIH, biologists from over 1,000 academic institutions around the world assessed survey items on when a human's life begins. And you know what? An overall 96% of them all said conception. You know why? Because it's clear. that when new DNA is formed, a new life form begins. Now, let me step back and just say that it is the person who confers magic upon a woman's birth canal that is actually making an argument that is of a superstitious nature and not necessarily a religious statement. But for a person like myself to actually say that morality exists and human beings have intrinsic value, we're not merely positing that from reason alone. We are also positing that from a philosophical basis. Yes, 100%. God exists. And the truth is that you don't want me to argue that religious argument, because if God does exist, then human beings do have intrinsic value and you can't kill them. But the religious argument alone is not even what I give today. I give you this reality that if a person is going to take the pro-abortion stance, they will ultimately have to find themselves drowning in a sea of idiocracy. I mean, even this guy talking about plants and whether or not they're alive and whether or not we should eat them, is such an idiotic thing. The distinction between baby and fetus, which, by the way, fetus is just a Latin word, that means baby. All of that is simply absurd. And again, you have to resort to the absurd in this conversation in order to try to draw a distinction. And the distinction, as we'll see throughout the rest of this conversation, is that the baby in the womb is not really a baby. Now, if we can simply establish the obvious fact that of course it is a baby, because why wouldn't it be one, and what else would it be? If we come to that conclusion, well, then the debate is really done. And then that's where all of the kind of ad hominem, ridiculous assertions come into play. So all I have to ask at the end of the day is, where did Tim get this guy? But unfortunately, we're going to have to listen to him drone on a little bit longer, because now we're going to talk about, well, what about abortion for the sake of life of the mother? How can you pro-lifers actually really care about life if you're going to let a mommy die for the sake of birthing a baby? So here's their conversation about that.
Maryland.
Yeah. I have the abortion clinic's number. We could call them right now and schedule an abortion at 34 weeks if you want.
And this is without regard, without reason, just...
I do it all the time on campuses.
So the challenge I have with this, maybe you can help me out, Ryan.
Yeah.
If the baby can survive on its own at 8.5 months gestation, why kill it?
I think the question, I still think we need to get to before that and actually put this in a human context.
Yes, he is absolutely avoiding that question because it's actually a good one. Why should we be able to kill and again, not that it really matters, right? Because you've got a heartbeat, you've got fingernails, you've got hair, you've got brain, all of that way before 34 weeks. But when you look at a 34-week-old baby, it looks absolutely indistinguishable from a baby at full term. So the question there, why kill it, is one that this again, pastor quickly wants to evade, because the answer is pretty clear. You wouldn't want to kill that baby. So let's see his response anyway.
Maybe it will help to share a story. I have a very close friend, mother of 3 amazing kids. Mm-hmm. Between the third child and she was trying to have a 4th child, she got to the point where it was time to give birth, and the doctor came in and said, it's likely that you won't survive this pregnancy. And so a mother has to choose between parenting 3 children that are already living, that are well into life, and having a baby. This is an impossible situation, and there is no solution from your side about what to do there.
Well, there is actually. So every single state that has a law that prevents abortions, whether in totality or when a heartbeat can be heard or when the child feels pain, there's always an exception to preserve the life.
I have to just say there, children that are already alive, like what does he think a baby is? Of course it's alive. But again, you have to resort to reductio ad absurdum if you're going to try to engage in this argument, because of how clear all of this is.
Life of the mother. Now, and when you look statistically at abortion cases, you know, about 1% of abortions are committed to preserve the life of the mother. And then you look at rape and incest. So here's trying to find some common ground with you. Would you say that 97%, because it's like 2% for sexual assault or incest. So that's like 97% of abortions are committed in our country because of circumstances.
But the hard question...
Of course. Now, I bet you can't guess that he is about to absolutely duck this question.
Are you in favor of joining me in saying those are wrong and those should not be permitted? And then let's have a logical, philosophical conversation.
It's an interesting pivot, but the real question is for you. Are you saying that you support abortion within certain boundaries?
Well,
Would
the
you
reason
support
I'm saying
abortion?
it is because
But it's just
asking,
a yes or a no question.
I'm asking you because when we have these debates about abortion, this comes up all the time when I'm on campuses, Tim. It's always, well, what about rape? What about the mother's life? I am more than happy to answer that, and I will answer that. But what I find very disingenuous is that when we're talking about abortion, 97% of abortions happen not for those reasons, yet we're being told that we need to keep abortion legal for any reason. And I think if you want to have common ground and kind of stop having part of this conversation, maybe some of the debates, I think a very easy way to start that common ground conversation is to say those other 97% of abortions should not permit it. And then let's have a conversation about the other 3%. Because I think it's kind of disingenuous to always start the conversation of going to the exception to then justify 100% of abortions.
I think that everyone in this country agrees on the health exception. Maybe the only people who don't were the Spartans, the women.
Well, life. We have to be careful between health and life.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Agree.
so
Right.
I believe you have in your mind a clip from the movie 300 where they're throwing babies off the cliff.
Is that what they were doing? Well,
Yeah, it is what they were doing, and it is kind of what we're doing now, except we're just using forceps to crush the skulls of children. Anyhow, the whole idea there is just simply that this guy refuses to answer the question and refuses to actually take a stance that of any kind of moral fortitude here. Because of course, the reality is that if you're going to believe in the life of the mother and take that kind of pseudo-moralistic stance, you would have to explain to me when it is medically necessary in order to abort a baby to save a mother. And here's the truth of the matter. Kristan didn't say this, but in these debates, they get kind of heated, and they often go quick enough to where sometimes it's hard to circle back to things. But here is a truth that we all need to know in order to engage in this topic thoughtfully. It is never, ever medically necessary to abort a baby to save the life of a mother. Now, in the process of trying to save the mother's life, you might abort the baby. In other words, you might do something that ends the baby's life, but it is always in the process of trying to save both that one might be injured or hindered. And let me just make one other kind of controversial argument that is really not made very much, but needs to be entered into the conversation. So I'll try to make it in as based a fashion as possible. Isn't it a virtuous and good and godly thing for a person to sacrifice themselves for the sake of saving an innocent baby? Now, I'm not saying that you even have to do this, because I'm positioning a hypothetical here, because it is never medically necessary to abort a baby to save the life of a mother. However, I'm just going to posit a world in which sacrifice, selflessness, and the nurturing care of a mother is one of the most powerful things on the planet. The best of all possible worlds would be the mother who would say this: if the chance of the baby surviving this thing, even though we're not aborting the baby intentionally, but the chance of the baby surviving this thing is basically nothing, well then I'm going to take the chance, I'm going to take the odds where the baby's life is more likely to be saved than my own life. Now, only in a world where courage is laughable is that not an acceptable position. This is what a parent is supposed to do, is to risk their life for their child. So all I'm trying to say is that even if we're to take this to an extreme and say the mother must make that choice, why do we never insert the noble position of being willing to sacrifice for a loving, for the sake of love, right? Love is love. at the end of the day. So all I would say is, first and foremost, this is almost an irrelevant conversation because it is never medically necessary to abort a baby to save the life of a mother. There is no pro-lifer on the planet who would say women must die in order for babies to be born. This is not happening. Even in places like Oklahoma, where Kristan said she helped implement the law, there are exceptions for the life of the mother. And just maybe one further kind of piece of information here, a DNC, where a baby is outside of a fallopian tube, like in an ectopic pregnancy, is not a pregnancy that a baby will ever survive. So that is not really an abortive procedure. But nonetheless, even if we had to argue, which we don't, that decision has to be made, why wouldn't we stand valiantly beside the choice of mothers to save their babies and say, hey, listen, we don't need that exception for the life of the mother, because we're producing a stock of women who love their children so much and are so selfless in their love toward their kids that they would, yes, be willing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of their children. Wouldn't our world be better if that's where we landed as a society? All right, let's listen to one final clip now that we've gotten to the ridiculousness of the argument surrounding exceptions to life of the mother. Let's get into the exception of rape and incest.
Of the fetus or something, that's like the legal definition. Mm-hmm. So I think when you look at even the most strict, like Oklahoma, I think, is just basically like no abortion, period.
Yep.
Doctors can try and save the life of the mother.
Absolutely.
If the baby dies,
we
they don't
helped
get in
write
trouble.
that law.
So the issue that I then have for the pro-life side is, why is rape and incest? Like there are many people who will probably argue right now, even in the chat, and who have argued to me, they don't believe abortion should be allowed even in the case of rape, because the baby is innocent, and it's the rapist who should be criminally punished, not the baby.
That's right.
So why then have an exception in law for rape and incest?
There's an exception. This is where it's tough for me to wrap my head around philosophically. There's an exception that is made in certain cases, but also the statement that to terminate a pregnancy is universally wrong. And so those two things cannot sit with one another in any type of system that can be legislated. The thing that is very interesting to me is that the things
Yes, they do. Okay, so the truth is that all of our laws require people to behave a certain way. Speed limit laws cause people to behave a certain way. This goes back to what I said at the beginning of the show, where it would just be incredibly absurd to argue that you can't tell me what to do with my body after you killed somebody. Ridiculous. Okay, so he has to pour on the vocal fry in order to sound interesting, I suppose, and then suggest that you can't legislate righteousness, right? You can't tell me what to do. We can't make people do what is right simply by laws. Well, let me just be really clear. You cannot legislate righteousness in the sense that you cannot make a law that makes somebody a righteous person or a good person. But what you can do is you can legislate morality. You can legislate things that force people to behave in society, that do demand that they control their bodies in certain ways. This is just a total non sequitur for this guy to say, your beliefs are just things you're trying to shove down my throat, but I'm not trying to shove my beliefs down your throat. See the difference? Well, the problem is this, is yes, you are. You are trying to shove the right to kill a baby down the throats of America. It's undeniable. So he is forcing people to do things, and he is shoving his beliefs down people's throat, whether he believes it or not. This is something that really bothers me, especially with the progressive stripe of Christians that we see on Tim's show and others like him, is that they believe in judgment-free spaces and making sure that everybody has the freedom to express themselves. Well, the problem with that is that there's no limiting principle. There's no slippery slope there whatsoever. First of all, they don't believe it. They believe absolutely in their way of doing things. And if you fly against that or oppose them in any way, they will absolutely get up in arms. I mean, this is exactly kind of what we see in the LGBTQ lobby, right? If you ever suggest that maybe it's not the best thing in the world to chop off the body parts of small children, or even to shove experimental cross-sex hormones down the throat of kids, they'll immediately say, you're trying to make kids commit suicide. You're genocidal. You deny our existence. right? Love is love until you oppose them, is what I'm trying to say. So no, all of our ideas come with repercussions. It's just a matter of which one is the most rational and which one is the most moral.
I believe do not require you to behave a certain way, but the things that you believe require me to behave a certain way to live in a civilized society. There's something about that is, when I have to choose what you want me to choose in order to partake of the benefits of this system, that's not freedom.
Well, I'm not telling you have to eat chocolate ice cream because I love chocolate ice cream or a certain food.
That's very good right there, because if we're talking about differences in like tax policy, let's not take a hard stance on that. But if we're talking about murder and ending the life of innocent children, then yeah, maybe we should have some restrictions on what people can do.
We're not talking about chocolate ice cream. We're talking about
being.
What you
live in this society where we all generally agree that murder, that the intentional killing of a human being is wrong, and there are strict punishments for that. That's one of the things we all that's a societal contract that we have.
But we aren't talking about the same thing.
Abortion is the intentional killing of a human being.
You've just taken someone who has been out of the womb for years with another person who's out of the womb for years.
So it depends on their age.
Murdering another person.
So this goes back. This is the whole fundamental debate. Is what is inside of the womb a person? Does that human being in the womb have rights? Because what you just made was an ageist argument. Well, the person who's being murdered in Bethesda, Maryland or Washington, D.C. has more value because they're out of the womb, their location.
They don't have more value, they have more agency. There's a difference there.
But I don't think agency is a prerequisite for rights under the Constitution.
No. It's
and
whether
that's
or
like
not
the
you're a
secular
person.
argument.
Correct. But let's bring this back to what it is. If we have a government overseeing this country that follows everything that you're saying, it is a government that continues to tell people how they ought to choose. And if they don't choose, that is backed up by force.
I need to pause right there.
Yes, because our laws should be backed up by force, especially when they have to do with protecting the lives of people. There should be some barrier to that unless you believe in anarchy or something. Let me give you the argument for this, because pro-abortionists end up sounding just like Southerners who wanted to keep slavery back in those days when they say, hey, states' rights, you can't tell me, federal government, what to do with my property. This is my property, my choice. My slave, my choice. Don't tell me what to do with these things. And you can't come in here with your guns and try to force us not to have slaves. Okay, all of that, by the way, was predicated upon the belief of what a human being is. So Southerners didn't believe that slaves were human beings. They believed they were property, and therefore they could force their will upon them any way they wanted, and the government had nothing to say about that. Now, of course, there's not a single leftist on the planet or progressive pastor who would argue that we shouldn't have abolished slavery. So why aren't we arguing for the abolition of a practice that not only is unjust, but every single time it is practiced ends the life of an innocent human child? See, slavery was awful enough, right? But it didn't always end in the death of a slave. Abortion always ends in the death of a human being, which is why we should even put more force behind it to make sure that it is unlawful, 100%. Now, let me just say two last things about this. First of all, if we believe that you should not own slaves and there should be a federal abolition against that, then we might think that we should have a federal abolition against murder. And since we do in the 14th Amendment, maybe we just start following the Constitution. I don't know. It grants people the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. So maybe we should actually start doing that for babies too. The second thing is just simply this. When we're living in a society that is morally relativistic, we're finding more and more that it becomes mentally absurd. And I believe it was Voltaire who said this, that if you can convince people of absurdities, you can convince them to commit atrocities. If you believe in nothing, in other words, you'll fall for anything. We need to make sure that as Christians especially, but as people in society, that we have some standards, some bridges that we're just not willing to cross. And so I leave you with just this final question. Can a Christian be an abortionist? Can they be pro-choice, if you want to use the euphemistic term, which really is just pro-murder? Can they be? And the answer is no. But maybe also importantly, can you be an abortionist and actually have logically consistent arguments? And the answer to that is also no. I bring you to Judith Butler for this final point. She argued in a paper that has become famous at this point in time, especially with feminists, that it is possible to be pro-abortion but not pro-baby murder. Or it's possible to be pro-choice without being pro-abortion. That's kind of the argument Judith makes. But of course, this is totally absurd. Because what does an abortion do? What is the end result of an abortion? What is it intended for? Of course, it is to end the life of an innocent human baby. So you cannot make the argument that I am pro-choice for a woman, but I'm really not pro-abortion, because we know what abortions do. That would be saying, like, I'm pro-swimming, but I hate the water. It's a non sequitur. It's not a rational statement. But again, there's so much programming going on today in the mainstream that gets us plugged into the matrix where we don't do any of our thinking for ourselves. We hear these mantras like my body, my choice, and we plug out and we think to ourselves, well, certainly I don't want to be the villain in the story. I want to be the good guy. So let me do whatever will make the most people pleased. And in the process, we forget that there is a stockpile of innocent babies who are suffering as a result of our inability to stand up for what is right. And it is morally egregious when that comes from pastors. Well, now that I'm off that soapbox, hopefully you were convinced. If you were, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments section below. If you weren't, I thank you for watching at least this far. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And most importantly, go with God.